Imagine if the government said one particular religion could no longer receive any benefits. They wouldn't get any tax credits. They couldn't perform marriages. What if all those perks just disappeared? It seems hard to comprehend, and yet that is exactly what just happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses in Norway. The Norwegian government recently rescinded the religious community status of the Jehovah's Witnesses. While that move won't ban members of the religion from gathering or practicing their faith, it will prevent them from receiving taxpayer-funded subsidies, which is a thing in Norway, and performing legal marriages. It's long overdue, and it comes a year after the government warned leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses there that they were heading down this path and temporarily cut off their funding. So why is this happening? And what does it mean? Norway, which has a national church but no longer has a national religion, is one of those countries where religion is literally supported by taxpayers. The more members you have, the more money your preferred religious or humanist organization receives. Any religious group with 50 registered members is allowed to apply for state subsidies. And in 2021, which is the most recent data I could find, 724 groups received that kind of funding. The law is very open regarding the kinds of religious or non-religious groups that can receive that money. However, there are some lines in the sand. If your religious group commits violence, threatens people, violates children's rights, or anything like that, then the government may not give you money. You have to respect the freedom of religion and basic rights already enshrined in the country's laws. To me, all that makes perfect sense. A group that endorses violence shouldn't get taxpayer money, nor should any group hurting kids or violating human rights. Sure, there are atheists who might argue that any form of religious indoctrination is child abuse, or that the Catholic Church, to name one institution, has hurt kids. But these rules are theoretically limited to things that are irrefutable and doctrinal and not up for debate, and not the result of a few bad eggs, or in the Catholic Church's case, a giant barrel of bad eggs. And here's the kicker. Groups that receive these subsidies cannot force people to remain members. They cannot ban interactions with non-members. They cannot make children pledge a lifelong commitment to them. Practicing faith is fine in the Norwegian government's view, but cult-like behavior will not be rewarded. And no, they say, not all religions are inherently cultish. All of this seems like rules you really shouldn't need because it seems obvious, and yet the Jehovah's Witnesses just got dinged for violating them. Here's where the witnesses stand in Norway. According to the government's Ministry of Children and Family Affairs, in 2021, there were 12,686 registered Jehovah's Witnesses in the country. That number meant taxpayers were on the hook to give the witnesses more than 16 million Norwegian kroner, which is now over 1.5 million US dollars. Don't quote me on the currency stuff, those numbers fluctuate. My point is, it's a lot of money. That year, however, 2021, the Norwegian government said it would begin looking into the witnesses after 2 former members and a separate anonymous whistleblower sent letters to them explaining that the witnesses were in violation of the rules. Part of me wondered why the letters were necessary, since it's not like the witnesses' beliefs are secrets. But I think government officials just needed to act deliberately and did not want to be accused of running some sort of witch hunt, so they wanted all the paperwork before they took any kind of action. Those letters got the ball rolling. It gave the government permission, in a way, to start investigating the group. Some of those claims against the Jehovah's Witnesses were admittedly open for debate. For example, does their policy against voting violate the rules? The witnesses say members cannot get involved in politics. which is why if you know any Jehovah's Witnesses, you probably know they never vote in elections. One of those letter writers in Norway argued that since voting in an election could lead to expulsion by the witnesses, which meant members could not interact with you, the no voting rule qualified as a violation of the law. The witnesses responded by saying they had every right to set their own policies, and if members wanted to vote, they were allowed to do so, as long as they accepted the consequences. There was nothing coercive about that. That's what I mean by debatable. Saying members can't vote isn't necessarily a violation of Norwegian law, even if the consequences of voting might be. But there were other concerns that the government took very seriously. In fact, according to a written statement from the state administrator in Oslo and Viken, there were two Jehovah's Witness beliefs that were particularly egregious as far as the law went. The first was the practice of disfellowshipping. Basically, if you're a witness who leaves the religion, you're effectively excommunicated. Members are told not to have any interaction with you, even if you're a family member. The idea here is that the former members will get so lonely or depressed that they'll eventually come crawling back. It is a cruel policy. There is no shortage of families that have been torn apart because of this rule. Do a search on YouTube for disfellowshipping and you will find some very sad videos.
And they announced it right away, that I was disfellowshipped from the congregation, and people should avoid, in front of the whole congregation, that people should avoid contact with me. And
the most painful thing I think you can do to another human being is to isolate them and cut them off. That's why solitary confinement, is such an issue in the prisons and stuff.
The state administrator wrote that Norwegian law requires all religions that receive government subsidies to practice a right to free withdrawal. If there's a serious obstacle to leaving a religion, that's arguably a violation. Disfellowshipping, the administrator wrote, can cause members to feel pressured to remain in the faith community. The second potential violation concerned how Jehovah's Witnesses treated children. If a child in a JW family makes it a habit to break the moral standards of the Bible and does not repent, the witnesses teach, they are also to be treated as pariahs. That means a young teenager, whether or not he or she is baptized, who quits the religion is also subject to exclusion from religious members. Now, unlike disfellowshipping, their immediate families do not have to kick them out of the house. But the state administrator pointed out how the witnesses believe that rebellious children can no longer, quote, have contact with other close family, including grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, or friends. That puts pressure on the child to remain in the fold, a violation of their own rights under Norwegian law. As the official said, we consider social isolation as a form of punishment against the child. So, because of these two systematic and intentional offenses, neither of which could be denied by the witnesses themselves since these are their rules, the administrator concluded that the witnesses were not deserving of the subsidies. They were still allowed to practice their faith. They just would not get any taxpayer money for it. They basically Jehovah'd themselves out of $1.5 million a year. The witnesses said at the time that they planned to appeal the decision. Their argument was that they did respect religious freedom, but within their faith, they also had the right to set their own rules. If you don't like them, that's on you. That's no different, they argued, from any other religion, so why come after us? Now, for what it's worth, those appeals went nowhere because their beliefs are different from other religious groups. Evangelical Christians and Catholics and Mormons will exert a lot of social pressure to keep you in the fold. But if you leave, there is no formal policy that church members cannot have any interaction with you. There's no formal policy in place designed to make you suffer for leaving. You might have arguments with family members. And you might struggle with the loss of a community with shared beliefs, at least for a while. But those churches are not mandated by their God to make your life worse. Jehovah's Witnesses are. And because of that, the logic went, the Jehovah's Witnesses had no right to be rewarded by their government for their beliefs. And that move infuriated them. You know, for a group of people who want nothing to do with the government, they were incredibly upset over not receiving a government handout. But if nothing else, the move by the Norwegian government would hopefully spur other religious groups to take a fresh look at their own policies. If they wanted access to taxpayer money, they needed to play by the rules. So that brings us to the latest update from December. Those temporary sanctions against the Jehovah's Witnesses were just made permanent. The state administrator in Oslo and Viken recently revoked the group's official religious community status, depriving them of those taxpayer funds and the ability to bless marriages that are accepted by the government. It is a far more serious sanction than the one the witnesses received last year. The statement said the witnesses violated their members' right to freedom of expression and freedom of religion. They violated children's rights too. In a more formal response, the official explained how the government had taken several steps to give the witnesses a chance to remedy these problems, but there was never any indication the witnesses were going to change their policies. There is still an opportunity to appeal the decision, but again, it's not clear on what grounds the Jehovah's Witnesses have a case. These really are their beliefs. These are their policies. Unless they're willing to change the rules of their faith, and good luck with that, an appeal won't go anywhere. Ever since this threat was first issued, conservatives in Norway have been making all kinds of slippery slope arguments against this move, suggesting the government was just going after religions they didn't like, as if the JW funding decision would lead to future funding bans on religious groups that oppose, say, LGBTQ rights. Government officials quickly rejected that stance and reiterated that beliefs themselves were irrelevant. It was the undeniable actions of the witnesses that mattered, and that's why they were not going to receive the subsidies. It's not like Catholics or evangelicals were being targeted here. That did not stop the JW governing body, their highest council, from acting like this move was unconstitutional in their latest update to members. Part of why I'm fascinated by this story is because the United States never holds religious groups accountable when they break the rules. They never lose their federal benefits. For example, the IRS technically prohibits churches from telling members how to vote under a rule called the Johnson Amendment. If they break those rules, they could lose their nonprofit status, which would be a death blow for many of them. But because the IRS pretty much ignores those violations for a whole host of reasons and hasn't revoked any church's nonprofit status, even when the evidence to do so is overwhelming, we've seen plenty of conservative Christian churches have their cake and eat it too. They get to function like an arm of the Republican Party, which is apparently what they want, while receiving all the benefits of a non-profit group. Unless the government enforces its own rules, those rules are worthless. In Norway, however, with this decision, the government is making it clear that religious institutions are not above the law. They're not going to get a free pass just because they happen to be religious. The Jehovah's Witnesses deserved to lose their funding, and now it's gone. And the same thing will happen to any other religious groups acting in the same awful ways. It's about damn time a religious group that broke rules while receiving benefits for agreeing to those same rules face some kind of punishment. One of the other aspects of this story that I love is that these Norwegian religious subsidies themselves have led to some fascinating and unintentional effects. Mostly because citizens are now wise to the fact that their money is going to these groups based on membership numbers. And they have a say in whether or not they want to prop up churches for which they no longer hold any special allegiance. For example, in 2016, the nation's Evangelical Lutheran Church launched a website to make it easier to track members and enroll new ones. But that backfired after thousands of people used the website to opt out of church membership altogether, depriving the church of some government funding. Considering that roughly 75% of the country were officially members, though, the exodus wasn't all that shocking. I mean, they realistically could only go lower. There was also a mini scandal in 2015 when the Catholic Church owed the Norwegian government more than $5 million for fraudulently registering thousands of people on its membership lists, precisely because they got taxpayer money for that act of manipulation. No wonder that after the church created an app for its members, more than 11,000 Norwegians resigned shortly thereafter because it became simple to remove themselves from the membership rolls. Those were not symbolic acts. The reason people actively went through the motions of getting off those membership rolls was because they didn't want the government giving those institutions money in their name. There are plenty of people there, as in the United States, who just keep a Catholic or Lutheran label because their families raised them in those traditions. Or they simply don't care enough to go through the formal process of changing it. But those subsidies have pushed some people to formally declare themselves not Catholic or not Lutheran. It just shows you how many religious institutions in Norway have financially benefited from the apathy of many of their own lapsed members. For now, though, the Jehovah's Witnesses won't be receiving any federal benefits. And it's their own damn fault for making cruelty and manipulation core to their faith. By the way, as I was preparing this video, the Jehovah's Witnesses published a brief notice on their official website saying a Norwegian court had issued a temporary injunction to stop the government from taking away our registration as a religious community. Basically, they're saying this isn't final. We may appeal the decision. Until they've exhausted every option, they're saying, they should still have the right to solemnize marriages. And that's fine. I mean, I don't care if they have that right until this is finalized. But if they think they're going to be able to get away with breaking the rules, I think they're wrong.